Hello and welcome to Eco Girl in a Modern World. My name is Shelly and my channel is dedicated to talking about ways to be more environmentally friendly in a modern context. I'm kind of excited for today's video. I wanted to talk about brand identity. And the reason I feel brand identity is important is because in last video we talked about spring fashion, and one of the things that we talked about was a pair of earrings, jewelry that I purchased. And it was very quality made, but when they came in, I saw that they were made by a brand called Alex Craft. And Alex Craft, when I looked at their website, they had an origin story. And it was a very moving origin story. It talked about a single dad who became unemployed and started a jewelry business out of his home that later grew to be this gigantic, accomplished jewelry company. And I was so inspired, but then I was a little crestfallen because later I found out that that origin story was not true. It was fictional. And we're seeing this a lot more with marketing nowadays where companies will create a fictional backstory in order to sell their product. And this is not a new concept. A lot of companies do this. It's funny, in 1977, Victoria's Secret, which is a known, lingerie company, they created a fictional company named Victoria, like for Victoria's Secret. And the owner of the company, Roy Raymond, thought that it sounded alluring. It sounded Victorian, and that's what so he created this fictional backstory of a woman named Victoria. Now this story is also mentioned in a documentary on Hulu called Victoria's Secret, Angels and Demons. That talks about the more controversial background behind the brand. But it was just interesting that was kind of one of the first times that a fictional backstory was created. Another fictional backstory that was created is like Hollister. Hollister states that it was founded in 1922 in California, but it was not. It was founded by Abercrombie and Fitch in 2000. And Hollister is a fictional person. It's not a real person at all. Same thing with Brandy Melville. There's also another great HBO documentary called Brandy Hellville, the cult of fast fashion, and that also talks about something we talk about here on this channel a lot too, is that the supply chains in which fashion is made. But with Brandy Melville, it is another company, and what it is Brandy was supposed to be an American girl who fell in love with an Englishman in Italy in the 1980s and founded this brand. But that is not true. The Brandy Melville was created after the 80s, and Brandy Melville does not exist. So it just got me thinking about the origin stories of businesses and how that plays into our buying practices. And I mentioned in last video about athleisure being very big, and as we're going into spring, everybody's going to be working out, everyone's going to be doing the sport of their choice, and that really influences how we buy clothes, and we buy a lot of clothes. We produce, there's already 10 times more clothes than we'll ever wear in our lifetime, produced and out in the world. So I did want to talk a little bit about brand identity and whether or not it's important to you as a consumer, because that really plays into being green. Now to start, last video I talked about an Adidas dress that I had bought secondhand, and I did wear it and it looked so great. But it got me thinking about the origins of Adidas, right? It's so funny. I caught myself watching the Rocky movie the other night, and I got sucked into it, and I ended up watching like the whole series, like Rocky 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I did start watching Creed as well, which are boxing movies. And my cat Max loves that too. He loves the training montage. He'll sit and watch with me. But it was so interesting how the first couple of movies, there was no branding. There was no the first two Rocky movies, you didn't see a whole lot of logos for athleisure brands. But the moment you got to Rocky 3, you saw Nike everywhere. And the moment that you got to Rocky 4, you saw Adidas everywhere. And it got me thinking, here I am wearing the slogan slogan of a brand that has been around for a very long time, that has its origins in Germany. So I wanted to know the backstory, and I really went down a rabbit hole with it. So I wanted to go ahead and share with you. One thing I did look at in last video too is the ranking. I was kind of curious, what's the most popular sports brand and why? And the top three really are Adidas, Puma, and Nike. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about their backstories because it's really interesting. Now, the first one is Adidas versus Puma. And I'm telling you, Hollywood, why you have not written this biopic yet, shame on you. Because, you know, I've seen movies like Ferrari versus Ford, but the Adidas versus Puma story is absolutely riveting because it is the story of two brothers who created two of the biggest sports brands ever in creation, and they're still at the top. And the story begins in 1898 and 1900 with the birth of Rudolf and Adolf Dassler. And they were born in Germany, and they were born in a little town that really specialized in shoes. And you see that, you know, it's funny, you know, you look at the 1900s and, you know, in Swiss, in Switzerland, you see the clocks and the watches that are made there. So, you know, you talk about Swiss craftsmanship. Same thing goes with German craftsmanship, especially with cobbling, with creating shoes. And what happens is you have these two brothers who were born, Adolf goes by the name Adi, A-D-I, and you'll see the name. And then Rudolf goes by Rudy or Ruda. And Rudolf was born first, and Adolf was born 2 years later. And both of them had very strong talents. Adolf really loved to make shoes. Like he was an apprentice of a cobblesmith in the city in which they grew up. And Rudolf was really good at business. He had a mind for bookkeeping and organization. He also kind of aspired to be a police officer, but you know, sometimes that can also be organization as well, right? And one thing we have to remember, and this is in a defense of them a little bit, is that when you've lived through two of the biggest world wars, you know, the World War I came in the 20s, and then World War II came in the, you know, the 30s, 40s. So, and especially Germany had a big part in that, right? But these two brothers were very skilled. They grew up in a shoemaking town, and their mother, Pauline, they actually all lived in the same house with their parents and later with their wives. It was a very big house, but they all kind of coincide together. And Pauline worked in a laundry business, so their mother washed clothes for a living. And what happened is both Rudolf and Adolf went through, served in World War I, and after World War I, they really Adi or Adolf really wanted to make shoes. And, you know, like any times of war, you have to really ration. And after the war, he really, Adi looked to make shoes using what materials he could find. So it was really like a really original way of creating. And he would use leather, he would use nylon from leftover parachutes, and he really got creative with his shoes. And at the time, you know, and again, you're going to see with all of these stories, you know, before there was television, before there was radio, before all of our ways of, you know, before you saw a celebrity walking down the street wearing the Athleisure brand, there was the Olympics. The Olympics was the #1 way to get your brand out to the world. And what happened was Adi started creating running shoes in you know, he would help his mom with the laundry, but he would be off in the corner of the laundry room creating running shoes. And Adi was a runner too, but he was creating running shoes. And what he wanted to do is he had innovative ways of adapting the shoe, including putting little cleats, little pegs in it. And he would use different materials, including rubber or steel. So he was creating shoes. And then, you know, Rudolph, when he came back from war as well, he also cared about, he was very good at managing things. Like he was good at running the manufacturing plant. So, in the years after World War I, Addy really started creating a lot of shoes. He did also go to a tech college to increase his skill with it, and his wife even said all his life she would find little scraps of paper where he would be scribbling down designs of shoes. So Addy was really the creator. He was kind of like the face of it. And in 1927, Addy approached a running coach, for German athletes, and said, what can I do to test my shoes? And he did. He started giving the shoes to the athletes, and they started using it, and they really just created a name for themselves. There was even a distance runner who won one of the early Olympics wearing their shoes. And so what happened is the two brothers combined their skills and created the Dassler Brothers Shoe Company. And so they got a manufacturing plant and they started making shoes. Now, what happened was, of course, later as you went along, Addy really started making contacts not only with coaches for the sports people, but also with the material providers. And there was a company called the Martz Company who had created the wood insoles. It was kind of the mannequin wood feet that you would use when you're creating the shoe. It would be the wood insert that you would create the shoe around. And the company was called Martz, M-A-R-T-Z. And the owner of the company had a 15-year-old daughter named Kath Martz. And Kath Martz would later go on to be the wife of Addy Dassler. Now, Addy was older. He was in his late 20s, early 30s, and she was 15 at the time, but they married 1 year later when she was 16. Now, at the ripe old age of 16, she had a lot of experience. Kath Martz was very opinionated with the way that things should be run. And what was happening is the other brother, the older brother, Rudolph, was running their factory, running their machines. So he was kind of like the silent partner. Addy was out meeting coaches, meeting people, marrying the daughter of one of his, suppliers. And, Rudolph was busy running the business. He was hiring people. He was running the books. He was, taking care of the actual manufacturing of the shoe. And all this is happening as you're coming close to the Second World War. And of course, with the Second World War, we had a pretty tough, a really mean and dictatorial leader of Germany at that time. Now, what happened is by the time the Second World War came around, it became very difficult for them to continue to run their store. First off, Rudolph got drafted, and what happens is when you get drafted, if you don't have if it's not like in the United States where if you're just of a certain age they can pull you to the front lines. If you have a job, you're not going to be drafted. But if you don't have a job, you're more easily, kind of poached and taken into the war. And that's kind of what happened to Rudolph. He was pulled into the war. And he was really afraid because he didn't want to lose what they had built as a company. But Rudolph also felt like Kath, his sister-in-law, who was this young woman, was trying to make a lot of the business decisions, trying to take those business decisions away from him. The other thing is Rudolph really did have to make some tough decisions. Addy and Rudolph's younger sister had two boys, and again, just like we said, if you're not employed, you would be drafted. And Rudolph had to fire his nephews from working at their company, and they were drafted into the war and they were killed. So their younger sister really never forgave Rudolph for that happening. The other thing is that Rudolph really did everything in his power to take care of their mother, Pauline. So there's this rift that started to form after Addy got married, and the other thing is that Rudolph got drafted into the war, but Addy really didn't, and that is probably, the Second World War he did not serve, and that's probably because he was wealthy and married to, kind of married into affluence, and you kind of see that amongst all countries. It's like if you're rich, you can kind of dodge the draft. And that really instilled a lot of resentment in Rudolph as well. The other thing is that, Adi did try to protect a lot of their workers. He didn't feel like Rudolph letting people go during the wartime was warranted. Rudolph also had to let go, was trying to fire a few of the other working girls in the mill and the shoe mill. And the problem is, again, once you're fired, you can be left destitute or worse, especially in wartime Germany. And the other thing is, Adolf was said to have sheltered a Jewish judge at the time, and that Rudolph was opposed to it. So there was a lot of saying back and forth about what happened during the war years. The other thing is that their company, their workshop was taken over by the regime and forced to make military goods. That happened to a lot of small businesses. They were told that they can no longer produce shoes. You have to start making anti-war, or wartime materials. So that's what really happened, and it was difficult because there's documentation that both brothers really did participate in the regime at the time. Adi did clearly stay on the sports side. Like he just wanted to participate in sports. He didn't want to really do anything else. While Rudy kind of may have been in the more influential, almost like a police officer, the training of the youth at the time, which was very controversial. But one other thing that happened was, at the time, the leader of Germany in the 40s did not really want to participate in the Olympics because, of course, at the time he was kind of trying to take over the world as a dictator. But he was kind of talked into it because what is the Olympics other than a display of your prowess and strength? And when it was kind of broached to him in that way, it was like, oh yes, let me show how powerful, the young German athletes are. And this was kind of an in. This was kind of a strategic way. Who knows? It might have been kind of like a sales pitch. And they did participate in the 1936 Olympics, which was a little controversial at the time. And at the time, Adolf Adi Dassler was there offering, Dassler shoes to the athletes. And one thing that happened was there was a young black athlete from Alabama. He was a U.S. athlete, and he didn't have any sponsorships. At the time, it wasn't like you paid athletes to wear your gear. It was more like given to them. And Adolf Dassler believed that he could really win, and he said, will you wear my shoes? And Jesse Owens, who was a track star runner from Alabama in the United States, wore Dassler shoes. And he won 4 gold medals. He was labeled the fastest man in the world. So, and that did not go unnoticed on both sides. Jesse Owens also was praised by the leader of Germany at the time. And when he came back home, he wasn't really recognized by the president. He wasn't acknowledged. And I don't know if that was more racism or the fact that he might have had affiliation with German companies, and we needed to be careful about that. But he was like the first Olympic star that shot their name brand into the limelight. Everybody knew that the fastest man in the world from the Olympics was wearing Dassler shoes. And so as the war went on, again, there was documentation that both brothers really did support the regime. They did the praise, they did the hand gesture to support the leader of Germany at the time, which did label you as an enemy to the United States. When the war ended and the U.S. troops went into Germany, they were ready to bomb any of the facilities that were making war equipment, but the Dassler Shoe Company was spared because we recognized that those were the shoes that the Olympic athlete from our country wore. So their shoe company got spared, but the damage was kind of already done. Rudolph really felt like his brother was against him. He didn't trust his brother's wife. His mother even kind of took Rudolph's side and said, you really turned your back on your brother. Adolf kind of made it sound like Rudolph was the more communist of the two of them, even though both of them had heavy charges set against them. And so by the early, after the V-Day, they broke apart. The Dassler company was dissolved, and it became Adidas and Puma. And the way it came Adidas is Adolf's nickname is Adi, and Das is Dassler, so Adidas. And that's actually the correct pronunciation. I always say Adidas. And then Rudolph went and created his own shoe company, and he did it over the river. There was a river that flew through their state, their country, and they kind of created workshops on either side of the river. And Rudolph went with the name Puma because he was called Ruda or Rudy, and Ruda and Puma, fast cat, fast runner. And they kind of went their separate ways. And for 60 years, the workers who worked at Puma did not cross the river. It's like you lived on your separate sides. You shopped at the grocery store. It was like mill towns. And there used to be skirmishes too. The workers of each company used to fight with each other. But as time went on, Rudolph did die kind of young. But he never really spoke to his brother. It was a really bad divide. Their mother kind of sided with Rudolph. The wife and the sister who lost her son sided with Addie. And they went on to be very strong shoe companies in their own right, and both with quality to their name. Now, as things went on, it did get easier. By the 80s, it wasn't as much as a rivalry. People really did start to get along, and even the grandson of Rudolph started to work at Puma, and then later went on to be like the CEO of Adidas. So it did mend itself in time, but the brothers never really, got back together. And the thing is that Adidas really rose to recognition. It started becoming the name brand of all sports, including soccer and football and running. And by the 60s and 70s, they were known as the running company. Also, it did have a resurgence in the 70s and 80s, especially in New York City, because there was that, in 68, both Nike and Adidas were real sponsors of the Olympics. Plus, urban youth in New York around the 80s and 90s, they still associate Adidas with being the fastest man in the world, like the coolest, strongest brand. And I mentioned in the last video, when you talk about Adidas, you think about Run DMC, which was the first crossover collaboration of music. Run DMC did a crossover with Aerosmith, and it really shot Adidas into the name. But Puma was always not far behind, and they were both really strong. Now, Nike really came into the picture in 1964. They started as Blue Ribbon Sports, and what it was started by a kid fresh from college named Phil Knight. And Phil Knight was from the University of Oregon, and he was a runner. And he cared about quality running shoes. He felt like the shoes that were being used were just not quality. And what he did is he took a small amount of money and went over to Japan. And in Japan, they had a quality type of running shoe called the Anusaka, a tiger shoe. And what he did is he started a business deal with Japan to ship 20,000 quantity of 20,000 shoes over to the US, and he started selling these shoes out of the trunk of his car at sports games. And he was doing really well, but he just felt like that model, sales model wasn't going to go the distance. And he enlisted the help of a coach. And doesn't this sound like Adidas? He enlisted the help of a coach called Bill Bowerman, who was a gold medalist in the Olympics in 1960 for running. But Bill Bowerman started making tweaks to the sneaker, the tiger shoes. He started padding the back and making it more cushy and more supportive for running. And he actually created a sole of the shoes using a waffle iron. And that was one of the first prototypes for the Nike runner. Now, what happened is the deal with Japan started to sour a little bit, because what was happening was Nike was starting to get its own popularity, and they just weren't fulfilling his orders as quickly. And what Phil Knight later found out was that the popularity was crossing the pond, and his manufacturer was selling to all of their constituents in Japan first, and then sending what was left over to the United States, which was less than the 20,000 that they ordered. And they didn't feel like that was a fair deal, so they said, okay, well, we've pretty much altered the shoe to being our prototype anyway. Let's just make it in the United States. And that's what they started to do. Now, around that time, they also, put their shoe in the 1968 Olympics. So again, this was kind of the first branding that they did. You think of Jerry Maguire, the 1968 Olympics was really the first one that both Adidas and Nike were kind of paying people to wear their stuff. And at that time, so after the 68 Olympics, in 71, he decided he needed a logo. And so Phil Knight went to Carolyn Davidson, who was a graphic artist at the time. And in 71, he paid her $35, which would be about $200 or $300 in today's money, to create a logo. And she created the Nike swoosh. And also one of his interns, one of his colleagues had mentioned, the name Nike as being, because that was the name of the Greek goddess of victory. But Carolyn Davidson created the logo, and at first Phil Knight wasn't feeling it. He said, I'm not really liking it, but I think it'll grow on me. And then 10 years later to the day, he invited Carolyn over for a brunch. And what had happened is, in the interim, $35 doesn't seem like much, but, it was a good deal for her. She didn't mind, she didn't mind the compensation that she had gotten for it, because, like I've written a book and I've paid $300 for cover art. It's not like it's not like the person who creates it thinks that this is going to go on to be a bestseller, and that they need to have, Carolyn Davidson never asked for royalties or anything. But in 1981, Phil Knight invited her over, saying, hey, we've got a brunch for you. And when she walked in, there was a whole table of the board members for Nike. Phil Knight gave her a gold ring with diamonds that had the swoosh on it. He also gave her 500 stocks in Nike. And at the time, it was probably worth about $700 in 81, but those stocks today are worth $5.1 million. So he gave back to her, even though he didn't have to, because she created the logo that would go on to be their insignia for like ever. In 1988, they came out with the Just Do It, and they really continued to grow. And then, of course, later they were the first one to do the inverse. Instead of creating a product and having the athlete wear it, they approached Michael Jordan in basketball to put his name on their product, or to create a product that is his. And the rest is history with that. They made oodles of money over that collaboration. Now, a couple other brands that we just want to talk about real quick is Reebok. Reebok started in 1895 as J.W. Foster's and Sons, and it was it started in Bolton, Lancaster in England. And you'll probably notice this, is that if you have an old pair of Reeboks from 1958 to 1986, it has the Union Jack flag on it. You can kind of tell it's a British footwear brand. Just like the rest of them, and actually this kind of precedes Adidas, in 1924, Reebok had put their shoes, they had been the cobbler for Harold Abrams in the 1924 Summer Olympics, and he went on to be a gold medalist. And so their shoes had already shot to popularity. They were actually called mountain climber shoes, but today we would call it hiking shoes. But in England, that's a big deal because it's a very rocky terrain. You've probably heard of the moors in England. And in 1958, the grandchildren of J.W. Foster, Jeff and Joe Foster, came up with the name Reebok, which actually comes from a book. The African antelope was called a Reebok. It's Rhebok. And again, just like the Puma or the Adidas Gazelle, they felt like a Reebok would be a fast sounding animal. Now, where they really found their niche is that through the 60s and 70s, everybody was running, and it seems like through the decades, a different sport kind of comes to the forefront, or, there's different niches. But one little lesser known area were women's sports. Yes, there were women runners, but at the end of the 70s and early 80s, there was a disco era in the late 70s and dancing era, and then there was aerobics in the 80s. It was like, okay, how can you make dancing exercise? And Denise Austin really came out with it, and later Jane Fonda took the baton and ran with it. But Reebok really recognized that there were spending dollars. There was a market with women to give them a shoe that they could wear. And when you think about it, the high top Reebok came in a bunch of different colors. It catered to women with the bright colors. And the other thing is it supported your ankles with more of a ballerina shape to the shoe, which made it perfect for working out, especially with aerobics. And they made bank off this. They made $20 million in the 80s. It was huge. Between 82 and 85, everybody and their cousin was wearing a pair of female, aerobic Reeboks. Sybil Shepherd even wore an orange pair to the Emmys. There's a great costume designer named Susan Wheeler. She did the costume. She did the outfitting for Jumpin' Jack Flash, which is a Whoopi Goldberg. All of the outfits in that is so cool, and she wears a different pair of colored Reeboks in just about every scene. She also did St. Elmo's Fire, like Demi Moore was styled by her. Also Baby Boom. Also, and this is with the spring fashion, where, Boho 3.0, Lost Boys, there's a character named Sky. Oh my gosh. So, but Reeboks were really kind of, in, and she brought it mainstream with a lot of these movies, and all of the celebrities were wearing it too. And again, it was just amazing because no one was thinking to sell to a female market, and that's really kind of dumb. And you'll see in a minute with LuluLemon and everyone else, today 60% of the market for athleisure and any type of fashion for any type of marketing is going to be to women. That in the next 20 years, the top 1% of wealth transfer is going to occur to female Gen Z descendants. So you might want to get, if you care about sales, just from a financial perspective, you really do want to cater to women, and that's what Reebok did. Now, what happened was Adidas purchased Reebok in 2005, and which is a good thing, the consolidation of two kind of bigger brands. But of course, it was an international brand buying a British brand. So also in Europe. Then it was later sold to Atlantic Brand Corp, which really, I'm not sure how I feel about that. It kind of feels like a fire sale. But, in the late 80s and early 90s, they did try to, they tried to diversify. They tried to pivot a little bit because as the aerobics craze fizzled out, everybody was into basketball. And of course, after the Michael Jordan, Air Jordan, fez, Reebok tried to come out with the pump. They also did a collaboration with Kobe Bryant. So they kind of had their own affiliation. And the Kobe Bryant ones was very popular. It seemed like every brand had their own representative. But Kobe Bryant, he was a great basketball player, but he did sustain some injuries. So I just don't think his career went as far as Michael Jordan. I think if he had stayed in the game, that Reebok really could have recouped or been as big as Nike, or at least a competitor. They probably would have ranked 3. The next one I want to talk about briefly is Champion, and I'm actually wearing a Champion sweatshirt. This is a very big American brand, and I really do like them. And the reason that I like them so much is just because They started in 1919 as the Feinblum Brothers, and it was an American company in Michigan. And they later became the Knickerbocker Knitting Company. And I know that sounds a little cheesy, but they wanted to specialize, just like all of these other companies, they wanted to specialize in sports apparel that was easy to launder and comfortable to wear. They really wanted to have patents for material that sportsmen, that football players wore. And around the 20s, they really did start their niche with football. And they became the official brand of the college, the Michigan Wolverines. And what's really interesting is there's two contributions that Champion really did bring to the table. The first is in 1930, they were the first company to create the hoodie. Like seriously, like the hoodie with the kangaroo pocket, with the zip up. They created that. And they created that specifically for training purposes, for sports training. And it was meant for that insulation. Of course, Michigan winters are freezing. And so that was the first contribution, is they created the hoodie. The other thing is they created something called the reverse weave. And what that is it's an insulation process that has knitting down the side. So it has panels of knitting. It also, instead of cutting material vertically, they cut it what we call cross grain, which is horizontally. And when you cut something cross grain, it uses the prime parts of the material. And you can kind of tell when material's cut vertically, it's meant for using every little scrap. And you see that a lot in fast fashion because they don't care about the quality of the construction. They care about how fast and how they can use up every little piece. And using up every little piece is good, but when you're creating something that's meant to be worn and last a long time, it's almost like that, that greater value with how you're creating the material. But reverse weave was very functional, and it worked. And Champion later went on to become the actual clothier of the military, in particularly West Point. They did also become the clothier for a lot of different military bases. Like I see some Navy material. Also, my dad is Marine, and I see rare, rare. They don't make them anymore. Champion brand sweaters and shorts. And I just think, in the 70s, they had a pair of red Marine shorts with a gold logo, and you just don't see that made anymore by anyone. And it's like, okay, where did Champion go? Champion was the one who created this. Now, and it's funny, you'll see that before there's some very rare photos of Michael Jordan wearing Champion apparel, and I don't know if it's because that's the brand that his college used, but of course you're paid by Nike to wear their gear, but when you're not paid, the gear that you wear, the gear that you're comfortable in is really the name brand that you endorse, right? That you really endorse. Now, what happened was, in 1989, the brand was acquired by Sara Lee, which I know is a baking company, but you do see a lot of companies that own different things. But Sara Lee bought Champion, and in the 90s, and particularly in 1992, they were the official clothier of the Barcelona Summer Olympics. And this is where I remember it. I was a teenager of the 90s, and everyone had Champion sweatshirts. And again, it was the 90s. We were talking about the 20s and how everybody wanted to wear what the athletes were wearing. In the 90s, when I was a teenager, we were all wearing what the athletes were wearing. We also really love that Champion fade sweatshirt. And you can kind of tell the reverse weave. You can always tell because it has a certain logo. You can kind of see how there's certain hallmarks to tell if it's an authentic Champion. This is actually 100% cotton and it's super insulated. But they also supported a lot of European teams in 2008. Just like Adidas is a German company that's the clothier for all of the U.S. Athletes. We started doing the reverse. Champion's an American company, and they started being the clothier for the 2008 soccer teams in the UK, and I think in Ireland. I mean, there was a lot of soccer teams in Europe. And then just last year in 2024, Champion was purchased by Hanes Brands, which kind of warms my heart just because Hanes is a U.S. company and it's good to keep it all in the family. Another company you might see is Fila. Fila is another old school one that actually has a really good origin story. Fila started with two brothers, and you're seeing a pattern here, two brothers in Italy in 1906. And if I'm saying this name correctly, Ettore and Gia Severo Fila. And what it was is in 1911, and again, you see, just like in Germany, they had a shoe district. In Italy, just like in France, they had kind of a fabrics district. And in 1911, they really cared about quality fabrics. You see that in Italy a lot. There's a lot of quality wools and silks and, and patterns and weaves. And what happened was, in 1923, they established Fila as a clothier for those for people traveling who are transversing the Italian Alps, like mountain climbers. And this really did play into like zip-up jackets or parkas, and the quality of fabric that they used in Italy was really top-notch. Now, what happened was by the 70s, and again, 60s, 70s, everybody was running, but tennis was also coming into its prime too. And Fila, while Adidas and Nike were over there with the running folks, Fila said, let's go ahead and be the brand of the tennis champions. And there was a tennis champion named Bjorn Borg. And they went on to be a medalist, a winner, and they had the Fila brand. And that's where Fila really got its traction with like the tennis skirts and the zip-up jackets. The other thing is by 78, there was a mountain climber named Reinhold Messner, who was the first person to climb Mount Everest without oxygen, because normally it's high altitude and you need oxygen. Climbed it without any oxygen, and they were wearing head-to-toe Fila gear. So Fila really took over the corner for quality material, like good fabrics, and also the cornerstone of tennis and mountain climbing, like ice, mountain climbing. In 95, after the 80s, they really did see a downside. Tennis wasn't as popular as it was. The other thing is in the 80s, you had the Battle of the Sexes, and you had, who was that guy who used to break apart his tennis racket? Tennis was huge in the 80s. There was a lot of tension, so there was a lot of money to be made. But by the 90s, everyone was turning their attention to basketball. And just like Nike has Michael Jordan, Reebok has Kobe Bryant, Fila went ahead and did a deal with Grant Hill. And so again, everybody is riding the same coattails. Everyone has the same idea. Let me get the face of my shoe brand. And Grant Hill did have a good run. There are some autograph sneakers that you can still get. But it was a little bit of a kind of an end of an era, a little bit for Fila. Now, it changed hands a little bit in 1988. A company called Gemina bought it, and Gemina was also kind of a golf company, which was probably a good acquisition because golf is very similar to tennis. These are sports that are done at country clubs. That the pleated skirt and the zip-up jackets and the golf shirts. Golf shirts and tennis shirts are almost the same thing. So that was probably a good thing. But in 2007, it was acquired by a Korean company company, and it really took a different tone after that. Now, the Korean company really did keep the materials high quality. Fila Korea really did care about sustainability. All of these companies, Adidas, Fila and Nike, they care about that. You see a lot of recycled polyester, you see a lot of recycled nylon, and also Fila Korea has a lot of giving back programs. They care a lot about giving proceeds to learning initiatives and green initiatives, which is always a good thing. But one way that it did kind of change in its tone is that it did keep its tennis roots, but it did start turning to more K-pop. And again, from 2007 on, we really did get into the social media range where it was who was seen wearing your gear versus what your brand is. What sport do you support? And it isn't bad, but it is kind of going into that zone. Like you see a lot of influencers wearing it, and with the rise of movies like Challengers and stuff like that, they still have a cornerstone, but it just seems a little bit different. It seems like, okay, more of the rock stars are wearing it, and it's these bold colors. I would really just like to see them go back to tennis or go back to mountain climbing. Anna Wintour is the editor-in-chief of Vogue, and I read somewhere that she gets up at 5 a.m. in the morning to do tennis for an hour every morning. And gosh, if she were wearing a pair of Fila, I don't know, headband or, skirt, I just, I don't know, because a lot of K-pop, celebrities, they are the ambassadors for big time fashion like Chanel or Fendi. It just kind of makes athleisure kind of an afterthought, and I do feel like that still kind of pulls away for all the good that they do. It kind of pulls you away from your core. Now, two other brands is Converse, and Converse is really amazing because it started at the beginning. Converse started in 1908, and it was Marquise Mills Converse, and it was a rubber shoe company, and it started in Massachusetts. And in World War II, it really got its origins in rubberized boots and galoshes. So it cared about making rubber boots and rain jackets for the war. Before the first war, it really started also in basketball shoes. In 1916, it started with the high top basketball shoes. In 1917, it got the branding of All-Star. And what happened is in 1922, and you think about this, 22 was before everybody else. I think they really did this before, maybe even Nike got the idea from them. But in 1922, Charles Chuck Taylor, it was a very famous basketball celebrity, wore their shoes, and for the next 10 years, Chuck Taylor All-Stars were the it shoe for basketball. It was like the Air Jordans of its time. And then between 1932 and 1966, you could get it in every high school imaginable. And back then, high school sports was a huge deal. High school sports is still a huge deal, but basketball, and you could even get the All-Stars in specialty school colors. And then in 1962, Wilt Chamberlain, oh my gosh, another huge basketball name, and the Globetrotters. But Wilt Chamberlain wore All-Stars as well. So in the 60s, while everybody's out there running or doing track, Wilt Chamberlain was, the cornerstone of Chuck Taylor and Wilt Chamberlain. Now, there were a few brushes with bankruptcy towards the 70s. There was just so much competition with other shoe brands, but they did pull themselves back from the brink, and in 2003, they were acquired by Nike. And again, keeping it all in the family, that's kind of a good thing that another American brand acquired them, especially when they have such a history steeped in basketball. Now, Vans was another one, and this one is the skater shoe. So it started out as the Van Doren Rubber Company in 1966 by Paul Van Doren. And he was based in Anaheim, California. So Anaheim has given us Disneyland, Gwen Stefani, and Vans skaters shoe. And what it was is he created a rubber sole that has kind of like the diamond, like the harlequin shape on it. That type of rubberized sole really grips the surface of a skateboard. And he started creating these shoes out of his home, and he sold them for $2.50 to $4.99, which is about $19.50 to $49.50, under $50 for a good pair of skater shoes back in the 60s. And it became the favorite of all California skater culture. And by 1976, they came up with their slogan. There was some famous skateboarders who were practicing in an empty swimming pool, and one of them did a trick off the wall of the swimming pool, and they just took that. They said, "Off the wall." So Vans off the wall was their slogan. Now, what happened is between the late 70s and mid 80s, they really did kind of suffer a little bit. He was a very good shoemaker, but the business side was a little elusive for him. And there were a few brushes with bankruptcy. The other thing is they did kind of miss a few of their branding opportunities. There was a cult skater film where a bunch of these really great skateboarders kind of made this indie film, and they didn't have Vans to wear. They couldn't afford Vans, so they were all, and well, it was in the 90s, and they were wearing Air Jordans, which is really, you talk about blasphemy. A bunch of skater kids wearing Air Jordans. And when you think about it, you could have sponsored that video. You could have given them free Vans to wear and gotten a whole ton of marketing, because that video really did go viral in the 90s. It was like a cult indie flick on skateboarding, and they were wearing Air Jordan sneakers. So they missed out on that opportunity, but they did kind of come back. After that, they kind of learned their lesson and really did start investing more in the skater, the indie skater culture. And by 1999, they kind of got enough of their investment back to start investing in music venues. So Vans in 99 did start, investing in Warped Tour, which is almost like a Coachella. And then in 2004, they were acquired by the VF Corporation, which is another big conglomerate corporation. Now, coming back, there's just one last old school one, which is New Balance. It was created in 1906 in Massachusetts, and it was created by William J. Riley, who was a British immigrant. And what it was is Riley, when he raised chickens in his yard, and he noticed how the chickens would balance on their feet, and he noticed there were kind of 3 points of gravity: the ball of your foot, the heel of your foot, and the arch of your foot. And he noticed that none of the sports shoes really gave any support to arches, like the arch of your feet, which is like the most important. You talk about skating and doing tricks, you're landing and you're putting all this pressure on the ball and ankle, but nothing on your arch. You're putting all the G-force on your arches. And what happened was his children, they started an arch company in the 50s. It was almost like a Dr. Scholl's insoles. They started creating arch insoles that you could put into your shoes. And they made a lot of profit from it. So between 1956 and 1978, they were selling arch insoles, which were really great. By 78, they decided that, okay, all these other companies are making sneakers. Why don't we make sneakers? And that's how New Balance was created. And it's kind of funny because you see people wear New Balance too. It's kind of like its own cult phenomenon. And it's because it's a comfortable shoe and because it has the 3 points of support. And the other thing is when you open up a New Balance box, there's a chicken on the lid. And the reason the chicken's on the lid is because of that initial inspiration. Now, the last thing is Under Armour. And when you talk about Under Armour, it's kind of a source of pride because Under Armour started in my state in Maryland. In 1996, a man named Kevin Plank was 24 years old, and he was a captain for a football team at University of Maryland. And he noticed that all of the sports jerseys were made of polyester, and just since the 60s everything's polyester, and I talk on this channel all the time. Polyester doesn't breathe. It's made from petroleum. It's like wearing a plastic bag. When you have it on, you're sweating. When you take it off, you're freezing. And he said that he decided that he wanted something that would wick away moisture. And so what he did is he experimented with different weaves of fabric from polyester that would keep you dry while you're exercising or playing sports. And in his grandmother's basement, in his grandmother's townhome in DC, in her basement, he created something called dry wick. And so he perfected the material and he tested it out, and you see a pattern here. You have an inventor who collaborates with sports coaches, and he went ahead and he experimented. He gave out prototypes to sports players at Maryland, and it worked really well. There was a pair of compression shorts that he wore that kept him completely dry. He decided to go with the name Under Armour, and particularly the British spelling of Armour, Armour, because he felt like it sounded more traditional. You know, his origin started in the 90s, but he thought it sounded very old school. And he started to produce it in Maryland on his own, and he was becoming very successful. He got a big break in 1999 when Warner Brothers had Under Armour as the clothier of the movie Any Given Sunday, and he just took off in fame after that. And just like I mentioned with Rocky, in Rocky 3 everything was Nike, and in Rocky 4 everything was Adidas, right? So there, being seen, and Reebok and Jumpin' Jack Flash, having your product seen in movies or and on television or in social media is a big deal, and that's probably why all these celebrities wearing it really does it. But Under Armour also got a break in 2003. They got a $12 million investment from a big corporation. Also in 2009, Cal Ripken, who is a very famous baseball player, started wearing the brand for his jerseys. And then in 2014, they were the official Olympic clothier for speed skaters. So Under Armour has grown. And so now you kind of come into modern day, and you're seeing a pattern. These are people who participate in these sports. They had a creative idea. They vetted and collaborated with coaches, and they said, okay, this is what we need to do our sport. And I do see two other companies that are actually stepping up to the plate, because we have so many, the market is flooded with this. It's like, okay, basketball shoes, designer sneakers, just plain white sneakers, we got 10 million of them. But you put on any one of them, you might not have arch support. It might be real cushy. It might be too high. It's like, okay, all of them seem to be designed for different sports, but do we have one that kind of addresses the current needs of the sports that we play today? And that leads us to two brands that I think are really on the forefront. Under Armour is out there. I saw it just the other day. It competes. Under Armour is the competition for Nike right now, and Adidas. But another up-and-coming one is called On, like O-N. And this is a Swiss company. And what it is that it is a runner from Switzerland named Oliver Bernhardt. And I think it was 2012, he took apart a garden hose in his basement and taped it together into a prototype shoe for running. He also created kind of a wave, almost like a flexible kind of wave type sole that allows not only for arch support within the shoe, but flexibility with the movement of the force when you're running. And he actually pitched this to Nike, but Nike turned down the offer. So he went ahead and collaborated with two other investors and created On. And it's funny, I'm seeing On sneakers everywhere. They have 5 stars. They're sold at Nordstrom. They're $170. I haven't invested in them yet, but I'm seeing a lot. It's almost like I'm seeing them as being the type of sneaker that you can wear for Pilates, that you can wear for yoga and for running. And they have really good ratings. So I think they're doing something good there. And then the last thing that's been around for a while is LuluLemon. Again, I mentioned earlier, 60% of all marketing dollars are coming from women. And there's going to be, in the next 15 to 20 years, a great transfer of wealth to 60% of Gen Z women and the sports that they care about, just like Reebok in the 80s with, you know, the aerobics, the 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. I see that with Pilates and walking and running and yoga, hot yoga. So I really do think that there's a market that LuluLemon kind of filled, a niche there. And you know LuluLemon is the hot market. You see it with athletics too, Athleta, and everyone kind of jumped on the female market there. But LuluLemon really kind of cornered it. LuluLemon is a Canadian company, and I kind of chuckle a little bit because right now, you know, if you're watching this at the time it posts, there's some controversy about, oh, well, we can put tariffs on Canada. Okay, you're about to have 60% of the female population really ticked off that they have to pay 25% or more on their velour sweatshirt. And to be honest, I have looked at LuluLemon. It is cute. There was one that was a really soft kind of zip up, but it was a lot of polyester, and I felt like, hey, you know, it might be... I think it's worth the hype. It definitely does have the quality, but it's funny. I found a zip up the other day at the thrift store that was 60% cotton and 40% polyester, and it had the same design. It had the same ruching at the bottom and at the sleeves, and I just feel like, you know, it's a hoodie, and I just keep thinking, you know, I don't know. It was cool, but I give mad props to LuluLemon too. But I know this is a longer video, but I just wanted to kind of talk about that because I am curious. It's like, okay, when you talk about environment, we want to buy secondhand. We want to buy recycled materials. We want to know that at the end of its life that it can become something else. And most importantly, we want to know that it's going to do the job that we need it to do. If you're a runner, it's got to support you in running. If it's, you know, if you're a boxer, you know, it's funny. I'm seeing all of these no-name brands being specialty for, you know, for yoga shoes or boxing shoes or running shoes. But then I see all of these big companies that are flooding the market with kind of mediocre, more fashion-based. So I just really thought, okay, you know, knowing the origin stories, does that matter? Have we become so detached from the real basis of how these things are made or why they were made? And moving forward, instead of having fake stories, is it really important to you? And please comment down below. Is it important to you that it be a real company? Do you care about what it stands for? Or does it matter more that it just looks pretty? Because as we move forward, that's going to play a lot into our supply chain. We've already got so much out in the market. So I do always encourage buy secondhand, but also keep this in mind. You know, what kind of sport do you play? You know, do you wear Adidas? You know, is it so controversial? Was it really just two brothers trying to make a quality product during some very, very controversial times? Or do you think that it stands for something? You know how we say in fashion, you know, what you wear sends a message. What message do you want to send and why? But I thank you for checking it out. If you like what you saw here, I'd be very honored if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.